Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation, heck, college basketball fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Show. We're standing here in the Northwest Portico. Is that the best way of calling it?
Rotunda.
And Northwest Rotunda. Andy Backstrom right here, my thesaurus man and also co-pilot on the Tim May Show once again. Andy, we're here because Ohio State just named Jake Diebler full-time, big-time head coach after a sterling, 6-2 run the last 8 games of the year, including a win in the Big Ten tournament, and then a narrow, the refs took it away from him, loss to Illinois in the Big Ten tournament. But Ross Bjork, before we talk about football for a little while, Ross Bjork, the new athletic director at Ohio State, pulled the trigger. Talked to a lot of guys, considered a lot of candidates for the job, but he settled on Jake Diebler, a Ohio native. His dad's a longtime successful high school coach in Northwest Ohio. He settled on Jake Diebler because Jake Diebler checked all the boxes except having been a head coach for 10 or 15 years.
Right, and he said if you have the wherewithal and you can outcoach coaches that have been doing this for a really long time, which Ross Bjork believes that Jake Diebler did over this 8-game stretch, then why not pull the trigger? If that's your guy, that's your guy, and that's why they did this before the NIT. That's why they chose Jake Diebler. They talked to 50 head coaches, he said, whether that was directly or indirectly through agents. They talked to 15 at least former players, getting input from them of, what are you looking for in a head coach? What does it mean to have success at Ohio State? What do you think of Jake Diebler? So they did their research. This was thorough of a search, even though it's the guy that's down the hall. They put in all the chips, and they came out with Jake Diebler every time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I've told people even today before the press conference, I said, let's say for example, just throw a name hypothetically out there, Dusty May from Florida Atlantic. You hire him. The guy's been a quickly successful head basketball coach. It's still a gamble on whether he's going to fit, whether his style is going to fit here, not just in the way they play basketball, but in recruiting, acceptance by the Ohio community, for want of another term, Ohio Nation. Right on down the line, it's a gamble one way or the other, but you got to watch this guy, Jake Diebler, put under, you could say there wasn't much stress. I even asked him this question after the press conference. I said, on one hand, Jake, you had to feel pretty liberating when suddenly Gene Smith walked up to you and said, I want you to lead this team the rest of the way. We're letting Chris Holtmann go. That had to be liberating because cooking inside Jake has been a head coach his whole life, based on his father, based on the household he grew up in, winning a state championship way back when, etc. But the flip side of it is then the pressure comes back on because now not only are you expected to deliver for your assistant coaches, Coach McGuff walking around back setting the standard with the Ohio State women's coach, playing in the NCAA tournament. But you've got the pressure of delivering the next 6 or 8 games, but on top of that, proving yourself, but then on top of that, having your players on the 20, 23, 24 team finish in the right way. Yeah. So there were all these components coming on, and it looked like he handled it with great aplomb.
Well, the players in this current team just love Jake Diebler, and that's just apparent by the way they play for him, how hard they play for him, the way they kind of communicate with him on the court, off the court. I mean, he recruited a lot of these guys, and a lot of these guys will openly say that Jake Diebler was a big reason why they came to Ohio State. So this transition was pretty seamless. It's not someone that's new to them. They've been around Jake Diebler for a really long time. He was the offensive coordinator, associate head coach. He was the right-hand man of Chris Holtmann. So he was a fixture in this process. But now, like you said, this was growing inside of him. This has been his dream for so long. He got to have the controls and able to, put some tweaks on things that they might have been small changes, but they made huge differences. Yeah. And I think that was the biggest kind of fascination I had with this whole process was he just did little things, whether it was playing guys that hadn't had a lot of run, or playing at a higher pace and up tempo and more aggressiveness on both ends of the floor that made all the world of a change for this team. Has learned how to win the last month.
Exactly. Or really, when we talked about this a week ago before the Big Ten tournament started, I'm not sure he taught this team out, but he guided this team in the way to finish the season, finish games. That was the big bugaboo for Chris Holtmann, who, by the way, is now at DePaul, now the new DePaul head basketball coach. And congratulations for him bubbling back up to the surface, so to speak. He's got a big job ahead of him there. But was what really bothered a lot of Ohio State fans, media, and everybody else who was paying attention to the way this team would sort of wilt,
Right.
for want of another term, in the big swoon of a year ago and the big swoon of this past season there in January and February, early February. What do you think made the biggest difference there in the way Diebler went about his business, just in the aspect of finishing games?
Well, I think they just played with more intensity throughout, and I think that he did that in practice. I remember Bruce Thornton, we spoke to him right after Chris Walton was fired, and I asked him, what was practice like? And he said it almost felt like the off-season, and the way that they were just running hard, cutting time in between drills, no walking, and I think that there was just kind of an emphasis on go, 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 intensity, 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 and that showed up on the floor in every game they played. And so when you have a lead, you're still playing like you're down 10.
Yeah.
And that's how they finished a lot of these games. And I think that that was the biggest change, that there was no comfort in a lead. There was no kind of, taking a step back from things. Guys were always going. And Coach Diebler, Jake Diebler really held these guys accountable.
Yeah.
He was taking guys out, whether it was Roddy Gale, maybe backpedaling on defense, or, he would take them out, he would put them back in, but it was showing them, hey, I'm going to have a deep rotation of 10-plus guys. We're going to play with accountability, and if you're not hustling as hard as I need you to, we're going to go to someone on the bench that will.
Yeah, and he proved it. He played 9 games just this past Friday night against Illinois in the Big Ten quarterfinals. Too bad that game was ripped from their clutches by some really questionable officiating, in my opinion. I don't usually like to go that route unless it really bothers me. But when you see the biggest guy on the court shoving people around and shoving through people, and instead of him being called, the other guys are getting called, it really bothers me. And by the way, it bothered my wife.
It was a 14 foul disparity. I think Illinois had 32 free throws.
There can somebody's time to be a reason for that. This was illegitimate reason, in my opinion. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that there was definitely some questionable calls made in that game. But, at the end of the day, that was really a game that Ohio State needed to make an NCAA tournament appearance. And now they have the NIT, and the question is, how far can they go in that? I think, this is a team that could win it. And what can that do for a program? I was, listening to the radio today at 97.1 The Fan. They were talking about how, Evan Turner spoke about how winning an NIT his first year at Ohio State was really impactful for him to help him, just jumpstart his career, back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances after that, really contending for National Player of the Year. And I think that it's something for a relatively young roster can be good for them going forward.
Absolutely. The more times you play, the better off you are. That's why there are AAU leagues out there now, et cetera. It's really interesting because I want to jump into a little bit of football here before we move back to basketball. But coming up, I've got a little blurb from Jake Diebler. I asked him about the liberating feeling of becoming a head coach, et cetera, just what I prefaced with a while ago. I also asked him about, Michigan State, a team that Ohio State beat on Michigan State's floor, a team that only had 18 wins in the season compared to Ohio State's, 20? Michigan State's a 9 seed in the NCAA tournament, and Ohio State's playing Cornell on Tuesday night in the Schottenstein Center in the first round of the NIT.
Yeah.
And I asked him, basically, he was pretty interesting the way he answered the question. He would have made a case for his team, the way it finished this season, more than anything else. It definitely found itself. And then I've got a little interview with Michael Redd, former Ohio State big-time, second leading scorer in history. Could have been the all-time leader if he'd returned. He and I've talked about that many times. I've got him responding to or reacting to the Jake Diebler elevation to full-time head coach. And by the way, spoiler alert, he likes it. And then I've got Keith Diebler, Jake Diebler's dad, just talking about how long ago he saw this ability to lead and coach come out of one of his 3 sons, right? I think, John and the guy at Pittsburgh.
Yes.
Yeah, whose name escapes me right now. I feel embarrassed. Hope he doesn't see this.
Jeremiah,
yeah. But just what he saw out of him then, and how much he hears himself coming out of Jake's mouth from time to time, in the way he explains things and stuff. But before we get to that little run, I wanted to ask you, Tony Alford left. We haven't had a podcast since then. Tony Alford left for the team up north, to join the team up north as a running backs coach. Kind of a sudden affair, caught a lot of people off guard, shocked a lot of people in some respects. As we speak right now, Ryan Day is zeroing in on hiring a replacement for Tony Alford, and I think he would like to get it done by the end of the week because Ohio State jumps back into spring football this week. But just what was your take on Tony Alford before I give you mine on making this move?
I think the most surprising thing about it
But also on Michigan making this move. Good.
Exactly. I think that's the most surprising thing is that, not that he is leaving Ohio State, it's when he's leaving Ohio State and who he's leaving Ohio State for. And I think when you factor in all that into the equation, it's very surprising. But, Tony Alford was someone that when the season ended, we were unsure if he was going to be back in general. His deal was up. They were going to have to kind of negotiate one more year if they wanted to keep him around. And that felt like a name that maybe he would be moving on. But he ultimately stays. He gets Quinshon Judkins. You have this running back room that is arguably the most talented in the country, headlined by Quinshon Judkins as well as Travion Henderson, who decided to come back rather than going to the NFL draft. And so when you factor in that as well, of working with maybe his most talented running back duo he's ever had, that makes it incredibly head-turning. And especially to go up north to Michigan now, where he'll have Donovan Edwards headlining that running back room. And, Jordan Marshall is someone that was a top running back in Ohio that didn't choose Tony Alford in Ohio State and ended up going to Michigan. Now he'll be reunited with him. So that's just a really interesting dynamic, and it's going to add a whole new wrinkle to the rivalry.
Yeah, and the funny thing is the rip on Mike Hart, a Michigan man, the reason he wasn't renewed up there, a lot of people, one of the things they said was his recruiting ability wasn't top notch, although you just named a couple of names. His recruiting ability wasn't top notch, and this is a guy that was basically, for one, was not renewed, so let go for one of another term, and they go to an Ohio State man to fill Sharon Moore does to fill that berth. That's just puzzling in all kinds of ways. The way I understand the way it went down was Michigan, in the final analysis, offered Tony Alford a 3-year deal at $850,000 a year, $850,000 a year. Ohio State, when I think Tony Alford approached him and told him what was up, countered. Not sure they knew what they were countering against, but countered with a 2-year deal, $800,000 a year. And he went where the money was. He didn't just go where the money was, maybe where he feels like there's a better opportunity. Sometimes coaches come to that moment in their career when they realize maybe I'm not going to be a head coach. Maybe it's not going to happen. We saw his own alma mater pass over him at least once, Colorado State, which I think, of course, Tony's one of the great guys I've met. I mean, in this profession, covering major college sports. And I wish him nothing but the best, in that regard. But the flip side of it is sometimes you just have to you've only got so many years you're doing this, and this deal is a hell of a lot better than this deal by $150,000 over the life of the deal, so he moves on. But it is very interesting. A lot of guys in the running now. Vico Ryan's out of Oklahoma. DeMarco Murray. I get those two names always mixed up. DeMarco Murray out of Oklahoma seems to be the leading candidate now. We'll see if that goes to fruition. I do know Ohio State looked at least at former Ohio State running backs coach Stan Drayton, who's now the head coach at Temple. He's been there for 2 years, hadn't had a real big success yet at Temple, but he had a buyout situation that was going on there that I don't think Ohio State wanted to get into. So there are other candidates, and we'll see who finally ends up with this job. But what's puzzling to me is Michigan is definitely in a rebuilding situation in all kinds of ways, including your coaching staff, including the players, the roster, etc. This team is getting ready to make a legitimate run, I think, at a national championship. I'm talking about Ohio State. That's the timing part of it that I really don't get from Tony Alford's standpoint.
Yeah, I think that job security is just one part of it. I think it's a 3-year deal at Michigan, and he was only on a 1-year deal at Ohio State. It could be a kind of proven situation if you have the best year of your career. Not only could you continue at Ohio State potentially, but also you could use it as leverage to get a different kind of job, maybe a head coaching job, maybe something higher up the ladder. But
yeah,
I get the idea of 3 years is better than 1 in terms of just the paycheck and building a future for people in your family. So that could have been a factor. We didn't get to talk to Tony about why he made that decision, but certainly, this running back room could be the best at Ohio State. Now, that being said, we've said that the last couple of years.
Yeah, we have.
And injuries have derailed that kind of point.
Last 2 years.
So we'll see if this time around that room can stay healthy, and really for a potential 16, 17 game season, they're going to need all 5 of those guys. to be at their best, or at least stepping up when one isn't.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, man, I appreciate you joining me, Anders. You know that, man. You always bring it. You always bring it. You're always trying to grab the controls and fly this plane. I don't blame you, though, as erratic as I am. But you know what? Before we get to my little run of interviews, quick interviews there with Jake Diebler, with Michael Redd, and with Keith Diebler, Jake Diebler's dad. I want to remind you, Ohio State's playing in the NIT tournament on Tuesday night here. I think if they win, they play again on Saturday. Do I have that?
Yes, Saturday or Sunday.
Saturday or Sunday. Let's get back to my conversations here with Jake Diebler, briefly, Michael Redd, a little more extended, and then Keith Diebler, the father and longtime high school head coach, talking about his son, Jake Diebler, the new head basketball coach at The Ohio State University. Yeah, of moving away from Chris and making you the interim head coach and stuff, was there a sense of liberation but also daunting pressure? I mean, explain what that kind of moment was like and what compare it to now.
Yeah, this feels.
You got to deliver, right?
This feels different. My focus immediately was on our guys. That's why I just picked up the phone and called parents as soon as we met, and we sat down and had individual meetings with guys the very next day. So that was. I didn't have a lot of time, or really just. It wasn't about anything other than that. Now things are different, right? There's a responsibility to oversee and look at things from a different lens.
Yeah.
So we'll embrace it. We'll be able to do that. But that was the focus at that time.
That's the reason I was asking, because you grew up in a head coach's. He was always in charge.
Yeah.
Others were working for him. He was
Yeah.
always in charge. How did that prepare you for this?
Well, he didn't stop coaching me when we walked through the door at night. So. Listen, it's about relationships. I saw very early on in my life when we had former players, they were current players of my dad's coming over, and I'd wake up in the morning, there might be a guy like sleeping on the couch, and it was a big family. So I've seen firsthand the power that this game and running a program a certain way, how that can impact people. That's ultimately what this is about. The beautiful thing is we get to do it on the biggest stage in the country. We get to do it while chasing these championships and following through on these expectations. But it's still about the people. It's about the people that came before us. It's really important to be about the people that are on our team and the people that will be here in the future.
What are in the NIT? What's just your take on that?
Yeah, I have said publicly I'm not an expert on what those qualifications and metrics to decide who's in and out. I think we've seen, right, that even this year with how big the bubble was, that there was going to be some really good teams not in the NCAA tournament. We're one of those. I don't think we proved that. We certainly proved that lately. But I also don't want to forget about the body of work that was done at the beginning of the season. We had a great non-conference win against Alabama, Santa Clara, UCLA, all kind of, maybe not had the seasons we thought they were going to have to begin the season, but they all ended up being good seasons.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I would certainly, if I got a chance to be in the room and sell why we should be in the tournament, I would have loved that opportunity. But I think there's some great representation from our league in the NCAA tournament. I'm excited about the opportunity for the Big Ten, and we're going to be following that. So.
Michael Redd, what do you think of this elevation of Jake Diebler to head basketball coach
John
at The Ohio
called
State
me to the
University?
press conference.
Yeah.
I said, I'm at your brother's press conference. And so just happy for Jake. He's deserved it for a while. He's done an incredible job with the program since Chris's departure. Prepared. I think that was a recurring theme throughout the whole press conference. Uber prepared his whole life for this. And so his passion for the program, his passion for our state means so much. And so I think he has the right moxie and he has the right approach to making this an elite program again.
I've always said this. People like to call schools football schools or basketball schools and things. This place has the wherewithal. I mean, they spend as much on basketball as anybody,
100%.
probably.
100%.
What do you think has held this place back for a while since your glory days, so to speak? I mean, why has it not made that leap, you think, in the last many years?
I don't know, Tim. That's a great question. Obviously, when we went to the Final Four, it kind of propelled the program to a different level. And then here comes Thad Matta and the success of his era, right? And so Chris is, I think, right after Thad. So I think when Chris first came in, we had some success, right? We need to get back to it. I don't know why. I just know we have to get back to where we were.
Yeah.
And I think Ohio State has the ability to be a premier blue blood basketball program.
Yeah.
And we've proven that in the last 20-some years.
Yeah. And last thing I wanted to ask you, he made a good point about being from Ohio.
Yeah.
The kid from Ohio maybe turns it up another 3 or 5%. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that
Well,
take? I mean, obviously you take
no doubt.
a 6'11" guy from Kathmandu if he was good, right?
No doubt about it. I think there's something about being from Ohio, to Jake's point, the pride that you take in being from here. Look at all the great players from Ohio that have played here. And so we all have taken pride in being here. So there's something special about playing in your home state.
Yeah.
And for me, I was in my home city, in my home state. So it was a different dynamic, like a Jared Sullinger, a couple of guys who experienced that. Bill Hoskett. It's a different dynamic, it is for sure.
Yeah. Last question, but I always have 2 more, but this will be my last one. What is it about just Jake's pure on-the-court coaching style, those last 8 games, where this team finished strong in every game?
Yeah.
That was one of the tough points with Chris Holtman the last couple of years. In Leighton. But what did you just see from him in that aspect of calling games?
I think his youthful exuberance. I think there's something to be said about that. The kids took on his personality, which is youthful, and he's relatable to where they are in their ages. I know he's young, but super connected to the players, you could tell.
Yeah.
And you can see him fired up on the sideline, his passion, and the kids took on that persona, and so that's leadership. And so he was able to lead them in a different way, different manner that they were able to relate to. So hopefully we can continue that.
Do you give it up to Ross Bjork for having the guts kind of to make this call? Because it is
a difficult call.
Yeah.
Here's the pros for this, and here's the pros for that, and here's the cons for this and cons for that. I mean, it's a difficult decision, but they get paid the big bucks to make those decisions. And so I trust Ross because I trust Gene. And Gene was the catalyst for all of this, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just really proud of the decision that Ross made, gutsy decision to make as an incoming AD, and I think he made the right one.
Age that he had it, or was there some convincing that had to take place?
Well, it was, in all the years I've coached, he's the best point guard I've ever coached. And, even at an early age, back in middle school, elementary, it didn't matter what he did, he was a leader. And, I figured eventually he'd come around to coaching, and it just took some time to understand the impact that you can have on people and young people's lives when you're in this arena. It's the last frontier to me, to where you can have such an impact on kids.
So it's not just the coaching, the X's and O's. It almost sounded like, as Ross was talking, culture and touching people, connecting with people.
There's no doubt in my mind that coaching is teaching, and that's the call. It's all about culture, and it's all about forming relationships. And I coached in the late '70s, so that's 5 decades, and I'm hearing from kids I coached that back then that said this all belongs to us. It's one big it's one big family. It's one that I think he's picked up really well, that it transcends everything else. You've always got these relationships. It's not about the wins and losses as much about where these kids end up.
Yeah. How often do you hear you coming out of his mouth?
I
You understand what I'm saying?
I hear it from a lot of people that have seen me over the years. He's better than me. He's always going to be. But the mannerisms, some of the things, the intensity, there's similarities. You grew up around it.
When Gene made that move and, moved away from Chris Holtman and moved to him, did he call you? Did he, that night or that day, or did he ask for some advice? I mean, what was the first thing he said to you or asked you?
It's probably no different when he called me from Valpo and said, I'm not playing. I'm a freshman. yeah, we stay in contact over that kind of stuff, and it was, you know, everybody can say Chris Holtman's an outstanding man, and when I look at the mentors he's had, from Homer Drew to Thad Mata to Bryce to Chris Holtman, you know, there's a piece of them in him. You can see a piece of everybody.
Yeah. Evolution.
As a dad, as a coach, is this one of your proudest moments in both of those aspects, to see a kid that you've coached and your son get to this point?
Probably, you know, the state tournament, winning the state and getting there another time with John was huge. But this tops it. And for me, it makes me feel like, you know, I've done it this long, and kind of like you passed the torch and you've passed some standards that you had that are moving on with the boys that I have.
Coach, can you speak to the burden that a head coach has that maybe people don't understand? I mean, it's almost, you're kind of like at the top of the pyramid. You can be buddies with people, but not necessarily, you know what I mean? You have to make big calls, tough calls sometimes.
There's always tough calls, but you're serving kids. You're serving the program that you're trying to establish the culture. But I would say probably the early 4:30 mornings to 9 o'clock at night. And I think you know that that's a standard for me. And you know, there's just like being at the Big Ten tournament, I'm sitting down there at 4:30 working on things in the morning, and he walks by and we spend some time together.
Yeah.
It's not a burden, but it's what you have to do if you're going to be successful, because paying attention to what type of kid you're coaching, what the kids need to get them to the level you want to, not only on or off the court, takes time. It's not a burden, though.
Yeah.
The legacy that the Dieblers are about to leave, you know, between you, both your sons on Ohio basketball, what does that mean to you to think about all the things that people will think about when they hear Dieblers and coaching and Ohio basketball just in general?
I would like to think the amount of lives we've touched and where they're at in their lives. And, you know, I go back to, it was about 3-4 weeks ago, one of my former players died. The one that was holding Jacob up in the pictures died of cancer, and going back and seeing the amount of players at the gathering we have, and the camaraderie and the things that are developed through that. I hope that kind of answers that question, but that's what coaching's about. Coaching's teaching, building relationships, and then beside the wins and losses, seeing where they end up.
Basketball coach soon?
That's a little tough to answer right now. I'm going to soak all this in, and it's something that I really am going to weigh here in the next 24 hours. Because if I'm going to make a decision, it's got to be soon. You know, I've got Jeremiah coaches at Plum in Pittsburgh, John's at Butler, Jake's here. You know, it's getting time I start seeing my grandchildren. They know what I look like when I'm around.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's in the back of my mind, and you know, I will sit down and make a decision here within the next 24, 48 hours.
With Jake mentioning he's from the 419, which was cool. You look at the top 10 all-time scorers at Ohio State. I think 6 of the 10 are from Northwest Ohio, Toledo. What is, I don't know, how cool is it for Jake to continue that Northwest Ohio tradition? I mean, Northwest Ohio in a lot of ways has really helped build this program.
Well, I think the state totally is a hotbed of athletics, and I think his rapport with all the coaches that are in the state and the things that he brings to the table is going to bring kids from every corner of the state, and I think that's going to be a strength of his, along with you know, coaching and teaching. But that's you know, he's going to do well.